The stars were fading like dying embers across a blackened sky, their light swallowed by a silence deeper than the void itself. Across the cold corridors of the galaxy, ancient empires lay in ruin, their bones scattered among drifting hulks of broken warships, their banners frayed and forgotten. It was in this silence that the Grey Knights stood sentinel, warriors born not of chance but of terrible design, guardians bound to an oath no mortal tongue could ever speak. Yet even their silvered helms could not hide the truth, the tears that never fell, the grief that never had a voice. You who listen now, you who drift through your own silence, know this. We care for you more than the universe itself remembers to care for its fading children. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. In the hollow echo of Titan's cathedral halls, a single figure walked. His armor was a mirror to the galaxy's dying light, engraved with sigils older than the Imperium itself. Grandmaster Elric bore the weight of millennia, though his features remained carved in the stillness of immortality. He had led wars against horrors that defied the tongue, had watched brothers fall into ash, had seen worlds burn beneath the shadow of demonic wings. Yet it was not the memory of victory that bound him, but the silence that followed. Each triumph was hollow, each conquest a wound. Immortality stretched before him not as gift, but as endless exile. He was not weary of war. He was weary of remembering. The galaxy whispered. Among the Inquisition's agents, unease spread like frost. Rumors carried from system to system of Grey Knights who had begun to hesitate, to question, to doubt. Elric knew the truth of it, though he did not voice it. He had felt hesitation burn through his own gauntlets when the blade hovered above a mortal's throat. He had felt doubt coil within when the Inquisition demanded silence, demanded the burning of truth along with the heretic. And though the Grey Knights were sworn to secrecy deeper than death, secrecy was not the same as purity. Silence could hide corruption just as it could protect faith. The Grand Master paused before the reliquary of his chapter. Silvered statues loomed, their eyes blind yet accusing, their hands locked around halberds that had drunk the lifeblood of demons. Elric gazed upon them, and for a moment he felt himself judged. Did he still believe after all the centuries? Did the fire still burn, or was he merely an echo of a warrior long dead, his soul lost, yet his flesh refusing to decay? Immortality was supposed to be triumph, yet it felt like theft, stolen from death, but robbed also of meaning. Elric closed his eyes. Behind them, memory stirred. The warp sang, though its music was a dirge. In the storms beyond the veil, he had heard voices call his name, not in mockery, but in pity. Immortal, they whispered, but not eternal. The difference gnawed at him, an open wound that no weapon could cauterize. Eternal was meaning, immortal was burden. He wondered if even the Emperor, entombed in golden decay, understood the weight of silence that immortality demanded. It was then that a voice broke the stillness. Brother Kalen, his most trusted companion through countless wars, approached with the careful steps of one who had seen the Grand Master lost in thought too often. Kalen's helm was removed, his mortal features scarred but still young compared to the centuries etched within Elric's gaze. The Inquisition has sent word, he said, his voice firm but edged with unease. Another order, another silence to enforce. Elric opened his eyes, the reliquary's silver gleam reflected within them. What do they ask of us now? Kalen hesitated. A purge. Not demons, not traitors, civilians. They say whispers of the warp have touched them. They demand fire to silence rumor before it grows. The Grand Master's gauntleted hand tightened on the haft of his nemesis weapon, though no enemy stood before him. His silence was not hesitation, but storm. He remembered the oath, the sacred vows that bound the Grey Knights to a purity beyond even space marines. But purity demanded justice, not blind slaughter. He turned, and his voice, when it came, was softer than Kalen expected, yet heavier than the weight of the galaxy. And if we obey, what do we become? Kalen said nothing. He did not need to. His silence was answer enough. Elric felt the chasm between them widening, the shadow of betrayal creeping not from malice, but from loyalty to different truths. The stars outside Titan's fortress monastery flickered, as if mocking the Grey Knight's eternal vigil. In his heart, Elric felt the first fracture deepen. He remembered battles long past, when brothers had stood shoulder to shoulder without doubt, when their blades had been pure, not because the Inquisition demanded it, but because they believed. Now belief was smothered beneath decrees and edicts. Silence, once holy, now choked them. He left the reliquary and stepped into the great hall, where banners of victories long forgotten swayed in still air. The silence pressed on him like a tomb. In that moment, he understood the truth that gnawed beneath his armor. Silence was not absence of sound. It was absence of trust. It was absence of faith. It was absence of tears. Yet he wept, though none saw it. Not upon his scarred face, but within. Silent tears that burned deeper than blood, falling upon a soul that immortality would not let die. He turned to Kalen once more, his voice breaking the stillness like a blade through glass. We will not be executioners of the innocent, not while I command. Kalen's eyes widened, torn between relief and dread. The Inquisition will not forgive defiance. Then let them come, Elric whispered, his voice almost prayer. Let silence judge, silence. Above Titan, a star flickered and collapsed into darkness, its light swallowed forever. It was omen and warning, mirror and prophecy. The galaxy shuddered, though no mortal ear could hear it. In that death, Elric saw his own future, an empire unraveling, a brotherhood breaking, a life unending, yet stripped of meaning. He walked on, his steps echoing in the hollow halls of eternity. The story of his fall had already begun, and somewhere beyond the veil, unseen eyes wept with him, though their tears burned like fire upon the fabric of reality. The night upon Titan stretched eternal, a silence that swallowed even the sound of memory. Within the fortress monastery, where stone walls bore the scars of 1,000 unseen battles, Grand Master Elric sat alone in a chamber, vast enough to hold the weight of an empire's regrets. The chamber was lit only by the dim glow of lumen strips, pale light glimmering against the inscriptions etched deep into adamantine pillars. Words carved in high Gothic, vows of purity and loyalty, stared down at him with cold indifference. He had once believed them absolute, but now they seemed brittle, cracked under the weight of centuries. For every oath whispered in these halls, there were countless whispers silenced by fire. Elric felt the hollowness behind the words, as if they were tombstones, not promises. He remembered the message Kalen had carried, its demand echoing still like a curse, a purge of innocence, branded guilty by suspicion alone. In the past, he would have obeyed without question, for such was the creed of the Grey Knights. But the centuries had left their mark, stripping away layers of unquestioned faith until only the marrow of doubt remained. What was purity if it demanded blood without sin? What was loyalty if it silenced the truth? The questions gnawed at him, sharp as demons' claws, relentless as the passing of time. Immortality had not freed him from doubt. It had chained him to it. A chime broke the silence. The chamber doors opened with a hiss, and Brother Kalen stepped inside. His armor bore fresh scars from recent campaigns, runes etched into ceramite by alien talons now ground to dust. His face was hard, shadowed with lines too deep for his years, a mortal countenance struggling beneath immortal duty. He bowed his head slightly, not as soldier to master, but as one burdened by unspoken truth. The Inquisition presses for an answer. They will not wait long. Elric's gaze did not shift from the inscriptions above him. And what answer would you give them, Kalen? The younger knight's jaw tightened. Obedience preserves survival. To refuse would invite destruction not only upon us, but upon the order itself. Defiance leaves us isolated, branded traitors. And yet, he faltered, words catching like flame in dry air. And yet my soul recoils at their demand. To turn blades upon those who have not sinned, it is not justice. It is not why we were created. The Grand Master finally looked at him, and for a moment the silence between them was heavier than war. Then you feel the fracture as well. You see the silence spreading, not as shield, but as poison. Kalen's eyes flickered, and there was fear within them. If we speak this aloud, it will destroy us. The Inquisition does not forgive thought, let alone dissent. They burn truth as readily as lies. Elric rose, the weight of his armor groaning like the bones of a dying colossus. He walked toward the center of the chamber, where the floor bore a mosaic of the Emperor's sigil, golden tiles dulled by centuries of booted steps. He stood upon it, and the shadow of his helm stretched long against the walls. What are we, Kalen, if not the guardians of truth? They say we are incorruptible, unbroken, eternal. But we are men still, no matter the purity carved into our flesh, no matter the warts etched into our blood. To kill without sin is corruption itself, no matter the mask it wears. Kalen lowered his eyes, as if afraid to let belief rise against fear. And if the others hear us, what then? Would they stand with you or against you? Brothers are not immune to betrayal, Elric answered softly. I have seen it before. I will see it again. But the first betrayal begins within, when a man betrays himself. The chamber seemed to shudder under the weight of those words, though perhaps it was only the echo of his voice. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not absence, but presence, alive, heavy, suffocating. Elric thought of the countless brothers who had stood beside him in past centuries, now ash, their names buried in silence. He wondered how many of them had carried the same doubts, but had never spoken. Perhaps that was the curse of immortality, to inherit not only endless years, but endless questions left unanswered by the dead. Kalen stepped forward, his voice lower now, more personal, stripped of the armor of duty. Do you regret it? The oath we swore? The burden we carry? Elric did not answer at once. His mind moved through centuries, wars beyond number, faces of the fallen. He saw victories that had saved worlds and silences that had buried them. I regret only that silence has become greater than truth. I regret that our vows, meant to protect, have been turned into chains. But regret does not absolve us. It only binds us tighter. Kalen's eyes lifted then, searching Elric's face for something. Faith, certainty, hope. But he found only the weight of centuries, the hollowness of a man who had carried immortality too long. Still, in that emptiness, there was a spark, not of despair, but of defiance. The door opened again, and another knight entered. Commander Severin, armored in cold precision, his every movement as rigid as a blade honed to perfection. His presence was command, his eyes devoid of doubt. "Grand Master," he said, voice clipped, iron-edged, "the Inquisition awaits your word. I trust you will not hesitate to affirm their will." Elric turned slowly, his gaze steady upon the commander. "And if their will demands slaughter without sin, would you still call it justice?" Severin's lips curled faintly, not in smile, but in disdain. "We are not arbiters of justice. We are weapons. To question is to weaken. To hesitate is to betray. Do not forget that, Grand Master, or you will find even immortality cannot shield you from judgment." The tension was a blade drawn between them, sharp enough to wound without striking. Kaelin's hand twitched toward his weapon, then stilled, uncertain. Elric did not move, though his silence was no longer obedience. It was storm held in chains. Severin's gaze lingered a moment longer, then he bowed stiffly and departed, leaving the air heavier than before. When the doors closed, Elric breathed deeply, as though drawing strength from the silence itself. He looked to Kaelin, and his voice, though quiet, carried the weight of prophecy. "The war we fight is not only against demons, it is against silence. And that war will consume us more surely than any blade." Kaelin bowed his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. And in that moment, though the galaxy itself burned beyond Titan's walls, two men stood together on the edge of betrayal, their souls bound not by orders, but by truth unspoken. Beyond the fortress, the stars wept unseen tears, their light dimming into the endless dark. The council chamber of the Grey Knights was a cathedral carved from shadow and steel, its high arches vanishing into darkness where even light feared to linger. Icons of the Emperor glimmered faintly in gold and silver, though the glow seemed muted, as if the weight of the galaxy's silence pressed down upon them. At the center, beneath the gaze of saints long petrified into memory, Grandmaster Elric stood before his brothers. Their armor formed a circle of silvered judgment, each helm polished to a mirror that reflected not only light, but doubt. The air was thick with unspoken questions, a storm bound in restraint. Commander Severin's voice broke the stillness, sharp as iron striking stone. "The Inquisition awaits no hesitation. Their command is clear. Purge the world of whispered corruption before it festers into plague. To delay is to betray." His words rang with conviction, his posture unyielding, as though he were not addressing equals but issuing judgment himself. His eyes, cold and unwavering, never left Elric's face. Elric felt their gaze upon him. Dozens of brothers watching, weighing, searching for weakness in his silence. He knew what they expected, unquestioned obedience, the affirmation of the chain that bound them all. Yet within his chest, where once faith had burned like a sun, there was only the hollow echo of doubt. He raised his voice slowly, each word deliberate, steady as a blade drawn with care. "And if whispers are all that condemn them, if rumor alone is the measure of guilt, would we still call ourselves pure?" A ripple moved through the chamber, faint but undeniable. Some of the knights shifted, their gauntlets tightening upon weapons they did not draw. Others lowered their gaze, unwilling to meet the storm rising in their master's voice. Severin's expression hardened, contempt curling at the edges. "Purity demands sacrifice. Innocence is no shield if the taint of the warp has touched them. You of all men should know this, Grand Master. Doubt has no place among us." "Nor does blind slaughter," Elric answered, and his tone, though soft, carried across the chamber like thunder rolling over a distant battlefield. Our silence was sworn to shield mankind, not to erase it. If we become executioners of the innocent, then what separates us from those we fight? The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Kaelin, standing at Elric's side, did not speak, but his presence was a shadow of defiance, a silent pledge that the Grand Master was not alone. Yet Elric knew the weight of Severin's gaze, and the whispers it would seed among the others. Doubt was dangerous. Spoken doubt was treason. Severin stepped forward, his armor catching the dim light, casting reflections like shards of broken glass across the chamber walls. You speak as though compassion were virtue, but compassion is weakness. It is doubt dressed as mercy. If you continue down this path, you will lead us all into ruin. The Inquisition will see your words as betrayal, and they will not hesitate to cut out corruption, even from within these halls. Elric did not flinch beneath the warning. He had lived too long to fear judgment more than silence. Then let them come. If silence demands we kill the innocent, then silence itself has become corruption. The chamber stirred, voices rising low, uncertain. One knight murmured a prayer, another muttered a protest. The circle fractured not in body, but in spirit, each man caught between two truths, loyalty to command and loyalty to conscience. Kaelin's voice finally broke the murmuring, sharp but steady. Brothers, we are not debating shadows. We are debating the soul of what we are. If purity becomes slaughter, then purity dies with it. Do you not feel the fracture? Do you not see the silence consuming us? The words hung like a flame, struggling in storm winds, fragile yet undeniable. For a moment, Elric saw flickers of recognition in the eyes of his brothers, sparks of doubt that mirrored his own. But just as quickly, Severin's shadow pressed upon them, his conviction burning like iron branding flesh. Doubt is the true corruption, Severin declared, his voice rising, and it spreads faster than heresy. If we allow it to grow here, in this chamber, among us, then we are already lost. I will not let centuries of service be undone by hesitation masquerading as conscience. We were not created to question. We were created to obey. The words echoed, cold and final. For a heartbeat, silence reclaimed the chamber, smothering every unspoken thought. Elric felt the eyes of his brothers upon him once more, the weight of choice pressing upon his shoulders like the crushing gravity of a dead star. He could bend, surrender to the silence, let it consume truth as it had consumed so many before, or he could defy and fracture the brotherhood forever. He raised his gaze, and in the dim light, his silvered helm seemed to glow with its own faint radiance. We were created to guard mankind from the abyss. If we become the abyss, then our creation is ash. I will not wield the blade against the innocent. If that is betrayal, then I embrace it. Gasps broke the silence, sharp and fearful. Severin's hand tightened on his weapon, though he did not draw it. The chamber trembled with the weight of what had been spoken, as if the walls themselves bore witness to treason. Kaelin stepped closer to Elric, his presence an anchor in the storm. But Elric knew this was only the beginning. Severin's silence now was not submission, but promise, an unspoken vow that this defiance would not go unanswered. The council dissolved in murmurs, knights dispersing with heavy steps, their minds fractured, their loyalties torn. Some looked to Elric with quiet reverence, others with fear, and still others with suspicion, sharp enough to draw blood. The circle was broken, though no blade had been raised. When the chamber emptied, only Kaelin remained. His voice was low, edged with both awe and dread. You have set us upon a path that cannot be undone. Elric stood beneath the gaze of the silent saints, their golden eyes blind yet eternal. It was undone long before my words, he murmured. I have merely spoken what silence could no longer contain. Beyond the walls, the stars shuddered, as though the galaxy itself recoiled. Somewhere, unseen, a flame flickered in the warp, hungry and watching. And in the depths of Titan, among the echoes of vows carved into stone, the first true fracture of the Brotherhood deepened, silent but irrevocable. The warp bled through the edges of reality, like ink through parchment, silent and unseen, yet pressing always against the fragile skin of the galaxy. Grandmaster Elric felt it that night, stronger than before, its whispers coiling within the silence of his chamber. They came not as the screeches of demons, but as softer voices, low and mournful, like distant bells tolling for the dead. He stood before the narrow slit of a window that looked out over Titan's storms, lightning crawling like pale veins across the frozen horizon, and wondered if the storm outside was any different from the one rising within. He had not spoken since the council's dissolution, nor had the brothers. The monastery seemed quieter now, each knight locked in his own thoughts, each step echoing too loudly along corridors where once conviction had marched without pause. Silence had become a weight, not a shield. Even Calen, steadfast at his side, carried unease in his voice. Though he spoke little, the fracture had begun, and fractures spread whether one willed them or not. It was past the turning of Titan's long night when a message was delivered to Elric. The seal bore the mark of the Inquisition, its wax black as void blood, stamped with the sigil of a Lord Inquisitor known for his ruthlessness. The words inside were brief, merciless. Compliance was demanded, hesitation was noted, and disobedience would bring judgment not only upon the Grand Master, but upon his entire brotherhood. Elric crushed the parchment in his gauntleted hand, the edges biting into ceramite. Their silence was a prison. His words had become chains. Calen entered quietly, as though drawn by the storm gathering in his master's stillness. His voice was low. They will not relent, Elric. The Inquisition smells weakness. They believe us fractured, and in truth, we are. His eyes lingered on the crushed message. Severin watches, and his loyalty is not to you. I know, Elric said, his voice the edge of a blade dulled by years, yet still sharp enough to wound. He would rather see the chapter burn than bend. To him, obedience is faith. To me, faith without truth is nothing but silence. Calen stepped closer, lowering his tone further, as though the very walls could betray them. Then you must tread carefully. Many among us look to you, but more still fear the Inquisition's hand. If Severin moves against you, you may find yourself alone. Elric turned from the window, his gaze heavy with centuries of battle, and studied the knight who had stood by him longer than most mortals drew breath. Would you stand with me, Calen, if the time comes? The question hung in the air, terrible in its simplicity. Calen's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with conflict. I would, he whispered at last, though the words trembled with the weight of their meaning. But know this, standing with you may mean standing against everything we were made to protect. If you fall, Elric, you will not fall alone. The silence that followed was broken not by speech, but by a presence. Elric felt it before it revealed itself, a flicker at the edge of vision, a whisper not carried by air, but by thought. He froze, his hand instinctively tightening around the hilt of his nemesis blade. The warp pressed closer, and in its pressure he heard his name, carried like a sigh across eternity. Elric. It was not demon's mockery, not the shriek of the damned, but something more insidious. It was pity. It was sorrow. The voice seeped into him, not through ears, but through memory, tugging at wounds long buried. He saw again the faces of brothers lost in fire, of mortals burned in purges, of worlds reduced to ash. He felt the silence of their deaths press against him like chains. He staggered back, his breath caught. Kalen reached for him, alarm breaking through his restraint. "What is it?" "Voices," Elric murmured, his eyes wide, haunted. "The warp mourns. It does not mock, it weeps." Kalen's face hardened, torn between fear and loyalty. "Do not listen. That path leads only to corruption. You know this. The warp deceives." "And yet," Elric whispered, "what if its sorrow is truth? What if even the abyss we fight sees what we cannot? That we have become executioners of silence, not guardians of man?" Kalen gripped his shoulder, armor grinding against armor. "You must resist. You are Grand Master. If the others suspect, if Severin learns you hear voices in the dark, they will not wait for the Inquisition's judgment. They will call you corrupted, and your fall will be sealed." Elric's breath slowed, but the voice lingered in the marrow of his soul. It spoke no command, offered no bargain, only its quiet lamentation. He felt tears gather unbidden behind eyes that had not wept for centuries. Silent tears, unseen, burning like acid across the walls of his spirit. He pushed Kalen's hand aside gently. "Do not fear for me. Fear instead for what silence makes of us." That night, he walked the halls alone, his steps echoing among statues of heroes long dead, their eyes blind, their hands locked in eternal vigil. He wondered if they too had doubted, if their silence had hidden questions the galaxy would never hear. At the heart of the reliquary, before the reliquary of relics said to be touched by the Emperor's hand, he knelt. But his prayer was not for purity, nor for strength. It was for clarity, for truth wherever it lay. As he rose, the shadows stirred. Severin emerged from the gloom, his presence heavy as judgment. His eyes flickered across Elric's form, reading him as a weapon might read its target. "You walk the halls alone at dangerous hours, Grand Master," Severin said, voice smooth but edged with steel. "Some might wonder what shadows speak to you." Elric met his gaze without flinching. "Shadows speak to all of us, Severin. It is only a matter of who listens." Severin's lips curved faintly, cold and humorless. "Careful, Elric. Shadows can consume as easily as they whisper, and the Inquisition watches closely for those who forget the difference." The unspoken threat lingered between them, heavy as a drawn blade. Severin turned and vanished into the dark, his footsteps fading, but his presence remaining like a scar. Alone once more, Aelric stood in the silence. The warp still whispered, sorrowful and endless. And as he listened, against Kalen's warning, he wondered if perhaps truth itself had begun to bleed through the cracks of reality. He wondered if his tears, silent and unseen, were not only his own, but the galaxy's. The storm over Titan howled like a wounded beast, its winds clawing at the fortress monastery, as though the world itself sought to tear open its stone heart. Within the chamber of remembrance, Grandmaster Elric stood among the shadows of the past. The walls rose high, lined with banners of battles fought before most mortals could count their ancestry. Each cloth frayed, each sigil dimmed, yet none forgotten. He moved slowly through the chamber, his boots echoing like the tread of a funeral march, his gaze drawn to the central dais where the oath of the Grey Knights was etched into obsidian stone. He had stood there once, younger in years though already burdened, swearing words that bound his soul to eternity. Now those same words weighed upon him like shackles forged from silence. He traced the inscriptions with a gauntleted hand, the grooves carved deep by ancestors who believed themselves eternal in conviction. Purity in thought, purity in deed, purity in silence. Elric remembered that night with a clarity sharper than any blade, the moment of swearing, the moment when his mortal name was cast aside and his life became nothing but duty. Around him had stood brothers radiant in silver, their voices rising in unity as they vowed themselves to the Emperor, to the eradication of the unclean, to silence everlasting. He had felt then as though the galaxy itself bowed before their unity, as though nothing could break what had been forged in blood and fire. Yet centuries had worn those words thin. They were no longer a shield, but a chain, no longer a vow, but a prison. He closed his eyes, and memory bled deeper. He saw the faces of those who had sworn beside him, faces long turned to dust, names erased by time or by silence. He remembered Brother Malchior, who laughed even as he raised his blade, believing joy could exist even in war. He remembered Divan, who whispered prayers for the innocents even as he burned them, his tears hidden behind his helm. He remembered Kalen, younger then, his voice unshaken by doubt, eyes alight with certainty. Where had that certainty gone? Where had his own? The warp stirred in the edges of his thoughts, not as scream, but as echo. He heard again the mournful whispers, sorrow pressed into the marrow of reality. He remembered Severin's warning, the Inquisition's threat, Kalen's fear. Yet none of them silenced the voice within, the voice that asked whether the oath itself had been betrayal. Was it loyalty to the Emperor or merely obedience to silence? He had lived too long to separate one from the other. Immortality had not given him clarity. It had only given him time to rot in doubt. He knelt upon the dais, his knees striking the cold stone, and bowed his head as though before the Emperor himself. Yet his prayer was not for purity, nor strength, nor victory. It was for absolution. If I am wrong, he whispered into the void, let me be broken. If I am right, let me endure. His voice faltered, and for the first time in centuries he felt warmth against his cheek, tears, silent and unseen, slipping past the unyielding mask of his face. They fell upon the oath etched beneath him, vanishing into the black stone as though consumed. Behind him, footsteps stirred. Kalen entered quietly, but not without hesitation. His armor bore the faint gleam of consecrated oil, his blade freshly purified. He stopped at the threshold, watching the Grand Master kneeling like a penitent soul rather than a warrior eternal. For a long moment, Kalen said nothing, for the sight struck him with both sorrow and reverence. At last he spoke, his voice low. I feared I would find you here. This chamber has always been a wound for you. Elric did not rise. A wound or a truth? Perhaps both. Kalen stepped closer, his gaze following the etched words upon the stone. We all swore them. They made us what we are. And unmade us, Elric replied, his voice heavy. Every vow carries a price. Ours was silence, but silence kills as surely as any blade. It has slain truth, slain compassion, slain even faith. How many have we burned because silence demanded it? How many innocents turned to ash so that our oath might remain unbroken? Kalen's jaw tightened. His hand trembled slightly, where it rested upon the hilt of his weapon. You tread upon dangerous ground, Elric. To speak such things is to challenge not only the Inquisition, but the foundation of our brotherhood. If others hear you, they will call you heretic. Then let them, Elric murmured. If truth itself is heresy, then we have long been damned. The words lingered, their weight unbearable. Kalen closed his eyes, torn between loyalty to his master and the terror of the abyss that such thoughts invited. He knelt beside Elric, his voice breaking as he spoke. I have followed you through wars that swallowed suns, through horrors that unmade mortal minds. I have believed in you, even when I doubted all else. But this path leads to ruin, not only for you, but for all of us. Do not make me choose between you and the Order. Elric placed a hand upon Kaelin's shoulder, a gesture both of comfort and command. You will not have to choose. The choice has already been made, not by us, but by silence. We are prisoners of our vows. I will not let silence consume us without voice, without resistance. The chamber trembled faintly, though whether from the storm above or from the warp pressing closer, neither could tell. Shadows clung to the edges of the room, whispering faintly, almost words, almost sorrow. Kaelin stiffened, his eyes darting, but Elric did not move. He let the whispers flow through him, let the mourning of the abyss seep into his soul. Perhaps it was corruption, perhaps it was truth, but it was real, and he could not deny it. He rose at last, standing tall upon the dais, the oath beneath his boots like broken chains. His voice carried, low but resolute. I will not break faith with humanity. If the Inquisition demands the blood of innocents, I will not give it. If silence demands obedience without truth, I will not obey. Let them call it treason. Let them call it corruption. I will call it justice. Kaelin's eyes filled with fear and something deeper, grief. He bowed his head, unable to speak. The storm outside roared, lightning striking across Titan's sky, like the handwriting of gods upon a darkened canvas. The chamber shuddered, and in that sound, Elric felt both prophecy and doom. He left the hall without looking back, his steps echoing like the tolling of a great bell. Behind him, the oath of the Grey Knights lay silent, its words unchanging, its weight eternal. Yet upon its stone lay a stain, unseen by any but the one who had shed it. A single tear, silent and silver, fallen from the eye of a Grand Master who had dared to question eternity. The days that followed were drowned in an unnatural stillness. Titan's fortress monastery, once alive with the steady march of purpose, now echoed with silence that carried suspicion rather than unity. Brothers passed one another in the halls without words, their visors lowered, their movements taut with unspoken judgment. The fracture that Elric had felt within the council chamber now spread like hairline cracks through the very stones, invisible yet ready to shatter at a single strike. Elric felt the weight of eyes upon him wherever he walked. To the novices and younger knights, he was still the Grand Master, towering in silver, the embodiment of incorruptible will. But among the veterans, those who had fought beside him for centuries, there was unease, a quiet questioning behind every salute. Severin's shadow stretched long across the halls, his whispers spreading as poison does, subtle and unseen. There were rumors of meetings in secluded chambers, whispers of purity oaths sworn not to the Brotherhood as a whole, but to Severin himself. Elric knew the pattern. He had seen it before on a dozen war-torn worlds, in mortal armies where loyalty fractured and one man's zeal became another's betrayal. Now it happened within his own blood. He did not speak of it openly. Not yet. To accuse Severin without proof would only tighten the noose the Inquisition already held. But Kaelin saw it too. Together they watched the halls grow colder, the bonds of brotherhood strained into brittle silence. One night, Kaelin entered Elric's private chamber, with urgency shadowing his face. His armor bore the grime of training pits, and his eyes held exhaustion deeper than battle could cause. He hesitated before speaking, as though even the walls might betray him. I heard them tonight, he said, his voice low. Brothers swearing loyalty not to you, not even to Titan, but to Severin. He has convinced them that obedience to the Inquisition is purity itself. He says you are wavering, that doubt has touched you. Elric stood by the narrow window, watching lightning crawl across Titan's sky, like claws raking the heavens. He did not turn as he answered. And do you believe him, Kaelin? The younger knight stiffened, his voice breaking with the weight of the question. No, but I fear others do. And once fear takes hold, it spreads faster than faith. If he moves openly against you, he will not stand alone. Finally, Elric turned, and his gaze met Kaelin's. The centuries of war etched into his face were hidden behind the stoicism of command. But in his eyes there was grief, quiet and immeasurable. I have led these brothers through horrors unspeakable. I have bled for them, burned for them, carried their dead names upon my soul. And still they would turn. Kaelin's silence was answer enough. Aelric moved to the reliquary that stood against the wall, its locked case housing relics said to have been sanctified by the Emperor himself. He laid a hand upon the cold metal, his reflection warped across its surface. It is silence that turns them. Silence does not bind us. It separates us. We cannot speak doubt, so we bury it. We cannot confess fear, so it festers. And in that silence, Severin has planted his truth, louder than ours. Kaelin lowered his gaze, voice weighted with sorrow. Then what will you do? I will not let silence consume us, Elric said. But to speak now is to invite open war within our halls, a war of brother against brother. And if that happens, the Inquisition will not hesitate to burn us all as heretics. The chamber fell into stillness, broken only by the thunder outside. Kaelin clenched his fists, torn between faith and dread. At last, he said, then perhaps we must wait. But if the fracture deepens, if Severin strikes, you must be ready to act, even if it means blood within Titan itself. Elric said nothing, though the thought gnawed at him like a blade pressed against bone. To draw blood within the monastery was unthinkable, yet he knew the storm was inevitable. Silence had already drawn its first cuts. The rest would follow. The days bled into one another, each marked by deeper distance among the brotherhood. Training halls that once rang with unity now echoed with the cold clash of blades sharpened by suspicion. Elric watched from the shadows as knights sparred with too much ferocity, as their eyes lingered too long upon one another's flaws. He saw Severin move among them like a priest among disciples, his words low, but his presence commanding, and the brothers leaned toward him as though seeking absolution. Then came the moment Aelric had feared. In the Hall of Oaths, where the Emperor's sigil blazed upon the floor, Severin gathered a group of brothers. Their voices rose in a chant of loyalty, a chant that should have been sworn to the Emperor alone. But the cadence was wrong, the words twisted subtly towards Severin's creed. Obedience above all, silence above all, purity through unquestioned faith. Elric watched unseen from the shadows, his heart heavy with the betrayal unfolding before him. He recognized faces among them, warriors he had trusted for centuries, warriors who had once bled at his side without hesitation. Now they turned, not with swords, but with silence reshaped into worship of another man's will. When the chant ended, Severin raised his blade high, its silver edge catching the light like a shard of judgment. Those who waver are already fallen, he declared. Those who question are already corrupt. We are the Emperor's silence, and silence does not doubt. Will you swear it? One by one, the brothers bowed their heads, their voices uniting in grim affirmation. Aelric stepped from the shadows, his presence sudden, his voice carrying like thunder. And what of truth, Severin? Is silence truth now, or merely the mask of fear? The brothers froze, their gazes snapping to him. Severin did not flinch. His eyes met Elric's with cold certainty, his lips curving faintly. Truth is irrelevant when silence preserves us. You speak of truth, Grandmaster, but truth has no place in the oaths we swore. Only purity, only obedience. The chamber trembled with the clash of their words, heavier than any blade. Aelric looked upon the brothers kneeling before Severin, and grief filled him. You are not silence. You are absence, and absence is death. Do not let him make you hollow in the name of purity. But no brother moved. Their heads remained bald, their silence not unity but surrender. Severin's gaze hardened. You see, Aelric, you are alone. You are the one who wavers. The Inquisition will see it, and they will not forgive. Aelric stood tall, though the weight of betrayal pressed upon him like the crushing void. He turned without another word, his footsteps echoing across the chamber like tolling bells. Behind him, Severin's silence grew, swelling like a shadow that threatened to consume the Brotherhood entire. As he walked the long corridors back to his chamber, Aelric felt the warp stir once more, whispering its mournful song. It did not mock him, it did not tempt him. It only wept, as though it too grieved for the silence that had claimed his brothers. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps he was no longer fighting demons, but silence itself, an enemy more dangerous than the abyss because it wore the armor of his own kin. The order came as all such decrees did, delivered in black-sealed parchment, borne by an inquisitorial courier who did not bow, did not speak, did not linger. Aelric broke the seal in silence, the wax crumbling like dried blood beneath his gauntlet. The words inside were sharp as knives. An uprising on Vedras Secundus, a mining world on the galaxy's edge, its people accused of harboring whispers of the warp. The Grey Knights were to descend, cleanse without mercy, and leave nothing but ash behind. It was signed not by name, but by a sigil, a mark of faceless authority that demanded obedience without question. He read it once, then again, though the words did not change. Each repetition cut deeper into the hollowness of his soul. He had been ordered to kill mortals before, countless times. But now the fracture within him widened, and the memory of Severin's whispered creed made the decree feel like a blade pressed against his throat. To obey was to prove Severin right. To refuse was to damn himself, and perhaps all who stood with him. Calen stood nearby, his face pale in the glow of the chamber's dim lumen. They mean to test you, he said, his voice strained. They know of your hesitation. If you refuse, the Inquisition will brand you traitor. If you obey, you become executioner. Either way, you fall. Aelric let the parchment fall from his hand. It landed upon the cold stone floor with a whisper soft as a dying breath. Then we stand at the edge of ruin, not by demons, not by war, but by silence forged into command. When their strike cruiser descended into the skies of Vedras Secundus, the world itself seemed to cry out. Black clouds rolled across its surface, lit by the fire of rebellion below. Hab blocks burned, their flames casting twisted shadows across the desolation. Civilians fled through streets choked with smoke, their screams drowned beneath the roar of collapsing towers. The air was thick with ash, heavy with the stench of burning flesh. And yet, among the chaos, Aelric saw no warp spawn, no demons clawing from the veil, only mortals, terrified, crushed beneath the weight of orders they did not understand. The Grey Knights disembarked in perfect formation, silver-armored giants striding across a landscape of ruin. Their presence alone silenced the crowds. Fear froze the mortals where they stood. Aelric led them, his halberd gleaming with consecrated wards, his every step echoing the inevitability of judgment. Behind him, Severin marched like a blade sharpened for this very moment, his visor lowered, his stride unwavering. The vox crackled with the Inquisition's decree: cleanse, leave no survivor. For a moment, Aelric's vision blurred. He saw not the burning world before him, but the oath of the Grey Knights etched in stone, the vow he had sworn to protect humanity. His gauntleted hand trembled upon the haft of his weapon. He raised his head, and in the sea of faces, he saw children clutching their mothers, men shielding their families with nothing but frail bodies, innocents whose only crime was to live upon a world touched by rumor. Severin's voice broke through the silence, amplified through his helm. Brothers, the Emperor commands. Burn the taint before it festers. For purity, for silence, for the Emperor. A roar of affirmation rose from the ranks, their voices thunder rolling across the city. Weapons ignited, flame projectors primed, bolters ready. Aelric felt the moment hang in the air like the pause before execution. He could end it with a single word, could damn them all with his silence. He raised his halberd high. For a heartbeat, the flames of the burning city reflected upon its silvered edge. His voice came low, almost broken, yet it carried across the ranks. No. The word cracked the air sharper than any blade. The formation froze. Brothers turned their helms toward him, confusion flickering in their silence. Severin stepped forward, his armor glowing in the firelight. "What did you say?" Aelric lowered his weapon slowly, his gaze sweeping across the brothers who had once followed him without question. "I will not slaughter the innocent. I will not call silence purity when it is fear. We swore to protect mankind, not erase it. If that oath is treason, then I embrace it." The stillness that followed was unbearable. Some brothers shifted uneasily, their weapons lowering a fraction. Others stood rigid, their faith in command unbroken. Severin's voice rang cold, unyielding. "You have spoken heresy, Aelric. You have betrayed your oath. You are no longer Grand Master. You are corruption itself. Brothers, seize him." The order cut through the ranks like fire through dry fields. Yet not all moved. Some hesitated, their weapons wavering. Calen stepped forward, planting himself at Elric's side, his sword raised, his voice trembling yet fierce. "If he falls, I fall with him. You speak of corruption, Severin, but I see only blind obedience in your eyes. You have twisted silence into tyranny." Severin's blade was in his hand in an instant, gleaming with consecrated fire. "Then you too are lost." The brothers stood caught between them, the fracture now laid bare, silence breaking into deadly choice. The air trembled, charged with betrayal and sorrow. Elric felt the warp stir, its whispers louder than ever, mourning, pleading, echoing through the smoke. He looked upon the civilians huddled in terror, upon the brothers torn in their loyalty, upon Severin's burning eyes, and he knew the war was no longer against demons, it was against themselves. The first bolt was fired. A single shot echoing across the ruined square, followed by the roar of ignited flame. The Grey Knights turned upon one another, silver clashing against silver. The purity of their order shattered into fratricide. Mortals screamed and fled as their supposed saviors became executioners of each other. Elric moved through the chaos, his blade striking not with rage but with sorrow, each swing a tolling bell for the death of their brotherhood. Calen fought at his side, fierce and unrelenting, their bond unbroken even as the order crumbled around them. Severin's voice rose above the clash, a litany of obedience, a creed of silence sharpened into command. Yet Elric's heart heard only the weeping of the warp, the mourning of truth drowned in blood. When the flames died down, when the smoke curled through streets lined with bodies both mortal and knight, Elric stood amid the ruin, his armor scorched, his soul heavier than the world itself. He looked upon the dead and knew that the Grey Knights, the Emperor's silence, had fallen, not to demons, but to themselves. The storm above Vedras roared, lightning searing the heavens as though the galaxy itself wept for what had been lost. And in the ashes of the city, Elric felt the first true tear slip down his face. Unseen behind his helm, a silver drop for a brotherhood undone by silence. Smoke clung to the ruins of Vedras like a funeral shroud, drifting in heavy coils that dimmed even the lightning-torn sky. The city lay broken, streets paved with ash, its silence punctuated only by the crackle of dying fires and the groans of collapsing stone. Among the ruins, the bodies of Grey Knights gleamed faintly in the glow, silver armor streaked with soot and blood, their purity defiled by brotherly slaughter. Elric walked among them, his halberd lowered, each step heavier than the last. The battle had ended not in victory, but in desecration. The order fractured beyond repair. He had spoken one word, no, and the echo of that defiance had birthed a war more terrible than any demon incursion. Calen limped at his side, his armor cracked where Severin's blade had struck, blood seeping through broken seals. His breath rasped inside his helm, but his voice carried still, hoarse yet unbroken. We should leave, Elric. The Inquisition will descend upon this world soon. When they find what has happened here, they will not see fracture or betrayal. They will see corruption. They will see you. Elric did not answer at once. His eyes swept over the civilians, huddled among the rubble, faces pale with soot and fear, staring at the silver-armored giants who had been both executioners and saviors. Some trembled when his gaze touched them. Others clutched one another in silence. They did not know what words to give the dead who had fallen around them. They only knew that gods in armor had come to their world and left it burning. Finally, Elric spoke, his voice low, reverberating through the ruin. We came here to cleanse, to purify, and instead we bled upon each other's blades. What remains of us is not corruption. It is the truth. But truth will be silenced before it is believed. Calen stopped, pain flashing in his eyes as he leaned upon his sword for balance. Then what do? Do we run? Do we fight the Inquisition itself? Even we cannot stand against that shadow. Elric turned to him, his face hidden behind the scarred helm, but his words carried the weight of centuries. We do not fight them. We endure them. We carry the truth even if it damns us. If silence is their weapon, then we will be its wound. As he spoke, the air thickened. Elric stiffened, his hand tightening upon his weapon. The warp pressed against the edges of reality, its whispers bleeding into the ruin like a mournful tide. He heard them more clearly than before, sorrowful voices echoing through the void, not mocking, not tempting, but grieving. He closed his eyes, and for an instant, the ruin of Vedras blurred into something else. A vision of endless halls filled with broken knights, their helms cracked, their voices silent, their tears falling into nothingness. They stood in shadow, countless and forgotten, their eyes hollow with the weight of oaths that had consumed them. Elric staggered, the vision searing him. Calen caught his arm, alarm breaking through his exhaustion. Again, the voices. Yes, Elric whispered. Louder now. They weep for us, Calen, for what we have become. Even the abyss mourns. Calen's grip tightened, fear hardening into anger. Do not listen. It is corruption. It is the warp twisting grief into poison. You know this. You know what happens to those who give ear to such voices. Elric opened his eyes, the vision fading, but its weight remained. And yet, what if it is not deception? What if it is truth? Truth that even silence cannot erase. Kaelin shook his head, but his expression betrayed doubt. He looked around at the ruins, the corpses of their brothers, the frightened faces of the mortals. If it is truth, then it is a truth that will unmake us. Before Elric could answer, a movement stirred among the fallen. Severin rose from the wreckage, his armor scorched, his blade cracked but unbroken. His helm had been torn away, revealing a face carved with zeal, blood running down his cheek like ink. His eyes burned, cold and merciless, as he staggered upright. "Unmake us?" he spat, his voice raw with fury. "You have already unmade us. You are the fracture, Elric. You are the corruption. This blood is upon your hands." Elric turned to face him, sorrow pressing against his chest. "This blood was born of silence, Severin. Not mine, yours, the Inquisition's, the creed that demanded obedience without truth." Severin laughed, a sound cracked and hollow. "Still you speak of truth, as though it were shield or weapon. Truth does not matter, only obedience, only silence. And you have broken both." He staggered closer, his cracked blade raised. "I will finish what began today. Your death will be the proof they need. The Inquisition will see your corpse and know purity endures." Kaelin moved to block him, raising his sword despite his wounds. But Elric placed a hand upon his shoulder, pushing him gently aside. "No, Kaelin, this is mine." The two knights faced each other amid the ruins, survivors of a brotherhood turned to ash. Severin's blade burned with the last embers of his conviction, his stance rigid, unyielding. Elric's halberd lowered into guard, its runes dim yet steady, his movements slow, burdened by grief. When they clashed, the sound was thunder tearing through silence. Sparks flew, steel upon steel, each strike echoing not as battle, but as judgment. Civilians watched from the rubble, too afraid to move, witnessing gods in armor tearing each other apart. Kaelin stood frozen, torn between loyalty and despair. Severin struck with fury, his blade a storm of zeal. "You are nothing, Elric, a traitor in silver. The Inquisition will carve your name from the stones, and none will remember you." Elric parried, his halberd sweeping arcs of sorrowful grace. "Perhaps. But memory is not truth, and even if silence erases me, it cannot erase what we have done here." Blow after blow fell, until Severin's cracked blade shattered, fragments scattering like dying stars. Elric's halberd stopped an inch from his throat, trembling, the final strike withheld. For a moment, silence hung, heavier than death itself. Then Severin's laughter broke it, wild and bitter. "You will not kill me. You are too weak, too bound by doubt." Elric's voice came low, like the tolling of a bell. "I will not kill you because you are already dead. Dead to truth, dead to the oath we swore. I will not stain my blade further with silence." Severin spat blood, his eyes burning with hatred. "Then the Inquisition will do what you will not." He collapsed to his knees, broken yet defiant, and the storm above roared as though mocking them all. Elric lowered his halberd, his heart heavy with the knowledge that this was not an ending, only another wound. He turned away, his voice carrying across the ruin. "Come, Kaelin. There is nothing left for us here but ash." Together, they walked into the storm, leaving Severin upon the blood-stained ground, his laughter echoing like a curse. And as they vanished into the smoke, the warp whispered once more, sorrowful and endless, mourning not only the dead, but the silence that had consumed the living. The storm carried them away from the ruins of Vedras, its winds clawing at the strike cruiser as it rose through the poisoned skies. Below, the world burned in silence, its cities reduced to embers, its people staring upward as the silver ship ascended into darkness. To them, the Grey Knights would be remembered not as saviors, but as executioners of their own kind, gods who bled one another while mortals cowered in fear. Elric stood at the viewport, the dying planet reflected across the scars of his helm. His silence was not obedience now, but mourning. Cailan stood beside him, his wounds sealed, but his spirit heavier than his body could bear. Neither spoke for a long time. Words had become too costly, too fragile to waste. At last, Cailan broke the quiet. What now? His voice was hoarse, filled with the weight of unspoken fear. We cannot return to Titan, not after this. Severin will speak before the Inquisition, and they will not need proof. They will already believe. Elric turned from the viewport, his gaze lingering on his brother. Then we do not return. To go back is to invite judgment not upon me alone, but upon every soul who stood beside me. The Inquisition will demand blood until silence is restored. We must walk a path outside their shadow. Cailan's face tightened, torn between loyalty and dread. There is no outside their shadow. It stretches across the galaxy. Wherever we go, they will find us. And if they do not, others will. To them, we are already condemned. Elric's voice was calm, steady, despite the grief that hollowed him. Then let us be condemned for truth, not for silence. Let them call us traitors, heretics, corrupted. Let the galaxy spit upon our names. What matters is that we do not lie to ourselves, that we do not kill innocents for the comfort of obedience. Cailan looked at him for a long moment, and though fear burned in his eyes, there was also a flicker of something more. Not hope, but resolve. Then I stand with you still, even if it damns me. Elric placed a gauntleted hand upon his shoulder, a gesture both of gratitude and sorrow. It will damn you, Cailan. There is no path that does not. But to choose damnation with truth is better than to live chained by silence. The cruiser drifted through the void, its course uncertain. The halls of the vessel felt colder now, haunted by absence. Too many bunks lay empty, too many weapons unclaimed. Those who had followed Severin had died or been left behind, their loyalty bleeding out in the ruins of Vedras. The survivors who remained aboard avoided Elric's gaze, their faces veiled behind their helms, their loyalty fractured. They obeyed his orders out of habit, not faith. He felt their suspicion, their silent judgment pressing against him like a blade at his throat. It was in the third cycle after leaving Vedras that the whispers returned. Elric sat alone in the sanctum of the cruiser, the faint glow of the lumen casting shadows across the runes etched into the walls. His eyes closed, his breathing steady. He felt the warp press close, not with claws or screams, but with quiet lament. The voices came soft, a tide of sorrow washing against him. He heard his name whispered again, not in accusation, but in mourning. Elric. The sound pierced him. He saw again the vision of the Hall of Broken Knights, their silver helms shattered, their eyes hollow. They stood in ranks endless, their tears falling soundlessly, vanishing into darkness. He staggered beneath the weight of it, clutching at the cold stone altar before him. You mourn us, he whispered into the void. But why? Are we not your enemy? Are we not your hunters? The voices did not answer in words, only in echoes of grief, a lament deeper than eternity. He felt it seep into his bones, the sorrow of something vast and unending, sorrow that had no language but silence. For a fleeting moment, he felt less like a knight, and more like a relic, a fragment of a brotherhood already dead, remembered only in tears. Kalen found him there, his body trembling, his eyes hollow as he lifted them from the altar. "You heard them again," Kalen said, his voice sharpened with fear. "You cannot let this continue, Elric. It will destroy you. It will give them the proof they seek, that you are corrupted." Elric's voice broke as he answered, "Perhaps I am. Perhaps corruption is nothing more than grief, too heavy to silence. Perhaps it is not the warp that breaks us, but silence itself." Kalen seized his arm, his eyes fierce despite the despair that lined them. "No, you are not corrupted. You are still Grand Master. You are still my brother. Do not let their whispers claim you." Elric looked into his eyes, seeing loyalty burn there still, fragile but unbroken. He nodded slowly, though the voices lingered, heavy as chains. The next cycle, the Vox crackled with an incoming transmission. Elric stood in the command deck as the message unfolded. It was the Inquisition, their sigil blazing across the display, their voice cold and merciless. "Strike cruiser designated Oathbearer. By command of the Holy Ordos, you are ordered to return to Titan immediately. Grandmaster Elric is to be taken into custody for trial under suspicion of heresy and corruption. Compliance is mandatory. Failure will be met with eradication." The message ended in static, the silence heavier than the words themselves. The crew turned to Elric, their eyes hidden, their loyalty uncertain. Some shifted uneasily, hands brushing weapons. Kalen stepped forward, his sword unsheathed in defiance. Elric raised a hand, stilling him. His voice was calm, steady as a final vow. "We will not return. The Inquisition demands silence, not truth. If they call us heretics, then so be it. Let them come. We will endure." The crew stirred, whispers spreading like fire in dry grass. Some nodded, fear etched into their silence. Others turned away, unwilling to defy the shadow of terror. The fracture deepened, unseen but inevitable. As the cruiser slipped deeper into the void, its course unknown, Aelric stood upon the command deck, the stars stretching endless before him. He felt the voices linger, their sorrow pressing against him, mourning what had been lost and what was yet to come. He closed his eyes, and a single tear traced down his cheek within the confines of his helm. It fell not for himself, nor for Kalen, nor even for the Grey Knights. It fell for silence itself and the brotherhood it had unmade. The void stretched around the Oathbearer like an endless tomb, its silence deeper than the grave, broken only by the faint hum of the cruiser's engines. Aelric stood at the command deck, his gaze fixed upon the stars, each one burning faintly against the infinite dark. They no longer seemed like lights of guidance, but like candles snuffed one by one, each a reminder of worlds lost, of oaths broken, of faith turned to ash. His brothers moved about the deck in silence, their armor heavy with unspoken judgment, their loyalty fractured into fragments sharp enough to draw blood. Kalen remained ever near him, though his face had grown thinner, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion and the weight of his choice. He had chosen Elric, chosen truth over silence, but the cost pressed on him with each passing cycle. He felt it in the way the others looked at him, their suspicion mingled with pity, their faith crumbling. With every moment, they drifted further from Titan's shadow. Still, he endured, his hand always near his blade, his loyalty to Elric a shield against the storm, gathering within their own ranks. The summons from the Inquisition had not been repeated, but its weight hung upon them still. Every brother aboard knew that compliance had been refused. Every brother aboard knew they now sailed as traitors. And in that silence, whispers grew. Elric heard them in the corridors, brothers questioning whether their Grand Master had been touched by the warp, whether his defiance was not truth but corruption. They spoke softly, careful not to let Kalen or Elric hear, but the air carried their doubts all the same. One night, as the ship drifted through a region of space where the stars seemed drowned in shadow, Elric felt the voices rise again. He sat alone in the sanctum, his helm set aside, his scarred face lit by the pale glow of the lumen. The whispers of the warp pressed close, not violent, not demanding, but mournful. They came like the sound of weeping carried through stone walls, soft but unending. He closed his eyes, and visions unfurled before him. Halls of silver knights standing broken, their weapons shattered, their eyes hollow. He saw the Emperor's sigil cracked upon the floor of Titan's great hall, its golden light dimmed, its promise withered. He saw his own reflection in pools of blood, his tears falling into them, vanishing without ripple. He whispered into the silence, "Why do you mourn us? What are we to you but hunters of your kind? Why do you weep for our fall?" The voices swelled, sorrowful, echoing through the marrow of his bones. They did not answer with words, but with weight, with grief that pressed so heavy he felt his chest crack beneath it. For a moment he thought he understood, that the warp itself did not mourn their deaths, but their silence, their failure to live as what they had sworn to be. Perhaps corruption was not claws and flames, but the absence of truth. Perhaps they had been corrupted long before Vedras, long before Severin. Kalen found him there, kneeling before the altar, his face pale, his eyes wet with silent tears. Fear sparked in his gaze. "Again," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You hear them again?" Elric lifted his head slowly, his expression torn between anguish and defiance. "They do not tempt me, Kalen. They do not promise me power or glory. They only grieve. They mourn what we have become." Kalen gripped his arm, desperation breaking through his weariness. "You cannot trust it. You cannot trust the warp, no matter how soft its voice. That is how it begins, Elric. Always sorrow, always pity, until you cannot see the blade it hides. You must resist." "I resist," Elric murmured. "Every moment I resist. But if their sorrow is truth, what then? If even the abyss sees that silence has consumed us, can we not admit what we already know?" Kalen's eyes burned, torn between faith and fear. "If you give them even a fragment of yourself, they will claim it all, and then you will no longer be you. You will be theirs." The words struck deep, but Elric said nothing more. He bowed his head, the voices still pressing like a tide against the walls of his soul. The fracture among the brothers came to its breaking point soon after. A gathering was called in the great hall of the Oathbearer, a space meant for unity, now heavy with division. Elric stood upon the dais, Kalen beside him, while the remaining knights formed a circle below. Their armor gleamed with cold light, their helms lowered, their silence louder than any words. One stepped forward, Brother Valdor, his voice like iron scraping stone. "Grand Master," he said, though the title sounded hollow upon his tongue. "We have followed you through wars beyond number. We have bled at your side, faced horrors none else could endure. But now you lead us into exile, into silence that is no longer our own. The Inquisition has called, and you defy them. This is not our oath. This is not purity. This is corruption." Murmurs spread among the circle, voices low but fierce. Others stepped forward, echoing his words. Some cried that they must return to Titan, submit to judgment, cleanse themselves of doubt. Others spoke of fear, that they had already been tainted by Elric's defiance. that to remain at his side was to damn themselves as well. Kaelin's hand went to his sword, but Elric lifted a hand, stilling him. He looked upon his brothers, their faces hidden, but their voices sharp, and sorrow welled within him. "You call me corrupted," he said softly, "and perhaps you are right, but not by the warp. I am corrupted by truth. I cannot slaughter the innocent for silence. I cannot obey when obedience is murder. If that damns me, then so be it. But I will not damn myself further by returning to Titan to let them burn us for speaking what they fear." The hall erupted, voices rising, shouting over one another, the circle breaking into fragments. Some cried for his death, others for his forgiveness, others only for silence to return. Elric watched them, and in their chaos, he saw the end of what they had once been. They were no longer grey knights, united in purity. They were men fractured by silence, bound by fear, torn apart by truth. Then Severin's name was spoken. Valdor's voice carried above the rest. "Severin lives. He will bring word to Titan. He will tell them of your betrayal. And they will come. They will come with fire." The truth of it struck the hall into sudden silence. Elric's heart tightened. Severin lived, broken but unbowed, and his voice would carry louder than theirs. The Inquisition would listen. The Inquisition would believe. Kaelin's eyes turned to Elric, fierce and unflinching despite the storm. "Then we must be ready. If silence comes for us, we will not meet it kneeling." The hall emptied in silence, each brother returning to his chamber, torn by doubt, by fear, by anger. Elric remained, staring into the darkness, hearing the sorrowful whispers pressing closer still. He knew the war was no longer against demons, no longer against the warp. It was against silence itself, and silence would not rest until it had consumed them all. The Oathbearer drifted through void silence, its engines muted as though the ship itself wished to hide from the galaxy's gaze. The rift within the Brotherhood deepened with each cycle, an invisible wound festering in the marrow of every knight aboard. The great hall where once their unity had been iron now echoed with whispered debates and quiet prayers for clarity. Though none dared speak their doubts to Elric's face, he walked those halls like a shade, his presence both revered and feared, his silence heavier than any decree. Kaelin shadowed him faithfully, though the strain carved itself into his features, a weight of loyalty dragging his shoulders lower each day. He had bound himself to Elric, but in doing so, he had severed himself from many of his brothers. In their eyes, he was no longer one of them, but something fractured, a fragment clinging to a man they now doubted. Still, he endured, though his blade remained ever near, as if expecting the moment when doubt would no longer remain unspoken. It was on the 23rd cycle after Vedras that the alarm was raised. A contact emerged from the void, a signal blazing with the mark of the Inquisition. A fleet, not vast, but sufficient, its vessels gliding through the darkness with the inevitability of judgment. Their vox message was brief, their words cold as a death warrant. "Strike cruiser Oathbearer. Surrender your vessel and your Grand Master to the Inquisition for immediate trial. Compliance will ensure your brother's survival. Defiance will mean eradication." The words hung in the command deck like a blade suspended above them. Elric stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed upon the cold stars beyond the viewport. He did not answer at once. The silence pressed upon the crew, their breaths shallow, their armor creaking with unease. At last, Kaelin spoke, his voice sharp with defiance. "We cannot surrender. They have already judged you guilty, Elric. A trial is only theatre. They mean to erase you, and with you, all who stand beside you." Brother Valdor stepped forward from the shadows, his voice hard and clear. Perhaps erasure is what we need. Better to return to Titan, to face judgment, than to die here branded as heretics. At least then, some fragment of our honor might remain. A murmur of agreement rose from others on the deck. Elric turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across them, heavy with sorrow rather than anger. "You speak of honor," he said softly. "But what honor remains when truth is silenced? If we return, we will not be tried. We will be executed, and our names buried in silence. The Inquisition does not preserve honor. It erases it." Valdor's jaw clenched. "And if we stay, if we resist, then we all die, our corpses drifting nameless in the void. What honor lies in that?" Elric stepped closer, the weight of his presence filling the deck. His voice was low, but it carried like thunder through the silence. "If we die, let it be for truth. Let the galaxy remember that once, even the Emperor's silent blades refused to slaughter innocents. Let our death be memory, not silence." The deck trembled faintly as the fleet outside shifted formation, their weapons primed, their intent undeniable. The Oathbearer was no match for them. To fight would mean destruction. To surrender would mean execution. Both paths led to the same end. Kaelin's hand tightened upon his sword hilt. "Then we must choose how we fall. Better to die defiant than to kneel in silence." Elric turned to him, and for the first time in many cycles, a faint glimmer of something stirred in his eyes. Not hope, but resolve. He placed a hand upon Kaelin's shoulder. "You are right, but defiance is not always battle. Sometimes it is survival. Sometimes it is endurance." He raised his voice to the crew. "We will not surrender, nor will we throw ourselves upon their guns. We will vanish. The Oathbearer will slip into the shadow of the void, into the places even the Inquisition cannot follow. Let them hunt us. Let them fear the silence they cannot control." Murmurs spread, some in agreement, others in doubt. Valdor's face twisted with frustration. "You doom us to exile, to drift forever as fugitives, hunted by those we once called allies. This is not salvation, Elric. It is a slow death." "Perhaps," Elric replied, his tone unflinching. "But exile preserves truth. Death by surrender preserves nothing." The decision was made. The Oathbearer turned from the Inquisition fleet, its engines flaring as it fled into the dark. Warnings crackled through the Vox, demands for compliance escalating into threats of annihilation. Lances of light tore across the void, grazing the cruiser's hull, shaking its bones. But the Oathbearer endured, vanishing into a nebula where shadow and storm concealed it. The fleet pursued, but the warp's edge lay near, a tide of unreality that only the desperate would dare to touch. Elric gave the order without hesitation. "Take us into the warp's veil. Let silence itself hide us." The ship shuddered as it crossed the threshold. Reality bled into unreality, the stars twisting into rivers of color, the void becoming a sea of whispering light. The warp pressed close, its voices louder than ever, sorrow swelling into a chorus. The brothers aboard tightened their grips upon their weapons, their prayers rising in hurried whispers, their fear palpable. For to linger in the warp was to risk corruption, and already their faith was frayed. Elric stood firm, though the voices clawed at him, though the sorrow pressed so heavily upon his soul. He felt his knees weaken. He whispered to himself, words only he could hear. "I will not be silent. I will not be consumed. If I must fall, let it be for truth." Kaelin watched him, his heart torn. He had seen Elric's strength hold against horrors beyond mortal comprehension, But now he saw something different, a man carrying grief too vast for even immortality. He wondered if his master endured, or if he was already breaking. The ship pressed deeper into the warp's veil, the fleet behind them fading into shadow, unwilling to follow. They were safe for now. But safety in the warp was an illusion. The Oathbearer drifted in currents of sorrow, its crew caught between fear of the Inquisition and fear of the abyss that whispered to them. That night, in the silence of his chamber, Elric knelt once more, his tears falling unseen. He felt the warp's mourning press against him, not as corruption, but as mirror. He saw in it the reflection of his brotherhood, fractured, weeping, lost. And he understood then that their enemy was not only the Inquisition, not only silence, but themselves, the silence within their own souls, the silence that had already consumed them. When he rose, his resolve was carved into his heart like stone. He would not surrender, not to terror, not to silence, not even to the sorrowful abyss. He would endure, even if endurance meant exile, even if exile meant eternal grief. The Oathbearer drifted deeper into the shadow, its path uncertain, its fate unwritten. And in the endless dark, the voices wept, as though the galaxy itself mourned for the grey knights who had become fugitives of silence. The warp was not a sea, though sailors of mortal ships often described it so. It was a wound, a scar in the fabric of reality, a place where thought bled into form and sorrow became flesh. The Oathbearer drifted through that wound, its engines muted, its shields trembling against storms of unreality. The brothers aboard moved like shadows, their prayers whispered, their eyes ever searching the walls as though expecting them to bleed. Silence had been heavy upon them before, but now it thickened into something suffocating, the kind of silence that presses upon the lungs until breath itself feels like defiance. Elric stood in the command deck, his helm at his side, his scarred face lit by the warp's shifting glow beyond the viewport. Streams of colour bled into one another outside, rivers of violet and crimson and pale gold weaving through the abyss. Faces flickered within them, or perhaps he only imagined it. Faces of fallen brothers, of mortals burned by decree, of children who had screamed before flames silenced them. They hovered at the edge of sight, mouths opening in soundless cries, their tears scattering into the currents of the void. He knew the warp deceived, yet he also knew grief when he saw it. And this grief was boundless. Cailan entered quietly, his presence steady, though his armor carried the scars of long campaigns and recent betrayal. He did not kneel, did not bow, but stood at Elric's side as an equal, as he had begun to do since Vedras. His voice was low but sharp with concern. The men grow restless. They whisper that to linger here is to invite damnation. They say we are already touched by it. Elric did not move his gaze from the shifting storm outside. They are not wrong. To live is to be touched by it. To carry silence within us is to be touched by it. We are already fractured. The warp merely shows us what we are. Cailan frowned, his hand flexing against the hilt of his sword. You cannot speak such words to them. They teeter already. Valdor gathers them in the lower halls, preaching of return, of surrender, of purging this fracture by casting you down. He whispers that Severin lives, that Severin will return with truth. If they believe him, you will not stand a chance. Finally, Elric turned. His eyes, hollow yet burning, met Cailan's. Then let them believe. Belief is what brought us here, Cailan. Belief without question, belief bound in silence. If they must betray me to preserve that silence, then I will not resist. But I will not return. Cailan's jaw tightened. And if they come for you? Elric's voice was quiet, steady as a blade drawn with care. then they will come, and they will see what silence has already done. The days blurred into one another, time meaningless within the warp's endless storm. The Oath-bearer drifted, its course uncertain, its crew fractured further with each cycle. Whispers turned to arguments, arguments to threats. Prayers grew louder, desperate, as though to drown the voices pressing from beyond the hull. And always, in the silence between words, came the weeping. Elric heard it at all hours, the sorrow of the abyss pressing against him, mourning them all. He did not flee from it, though Cailan begged him to. He listened because he believed it was truth. It was in the 12th cycle of exile that the fracture broke. Elric was summoned to the great hall by voices carried through the vox. When he entered, Cailan at his side, he found more than half the surviving brothers gathered there, their armor gleaming cold in the lumen glow. Valdor stood before them, his blade drawn, his eyes burning with zeal. "Grand Master," he said, though the title was spit more than spoken, "we can no longer follow you. You have led us into exile, into the warp's grasp, into heresy itself. The Inquisition waits. Severin lives. We must return, cleanse ourselves, and cast out corruption. If you will not lead us, then we will cut you down." Murmurs of assent rose from the circle, steel scraping as weapons were drawn. The air thrummed with betrayal, with the inevitability of brother striking brother once again. Cailan raised his sword, stepping before Elric, his voice fierce. "If you come for him, you will pass through me." Valdor's eyes narrowed. "Then you are already lost." The hall erupted. Brothers clashed, silver against silver, the sound of their vows breaking louder than their weapons. Elric stood amidst the storm, his halberd still lowered, his gaze sweeping across the chaos. He saw faces he had known for centuries, faces of men he had trusted, now twisted with rage, with fear, with desperation. He felt the warp press close, its weeping swelling into a chorus. He could not tell whether it mourned or rejoiced. At last, Valdor came for him, his blade raised high. Cailan intercepted him, their swords colliding in a spray of sparks. "Run!" Cailan cried over the clash. "Go! If you fall here, all is lost." But Elric did not run. He raised his halberd at last, sorrow burning in his voice as he spoke. "Enough." The word carried through the hall like thunder. For a moment, all froze, the clang of steel falling silent, the brothers staring at him. The warp itself seemed to still, the voices pausing in their lament. Elric stepped forward, his halberd gleaming faintly in the dim light. "If you wish to kill me, then strike. If you wish to return, then return. But do not speak of purity while your blades drip with your brother's blood. Do not call this obedience. Do not call this faith. Call it what it is. Silence consuming us." Valdor's hand trembled upon his sword. His breath rasped within his helm. You are the silence." Elric shook his head slowly. "No, I am its wound. I am its tear. I am what silence cannot contain." For a moment, no one moved. Then the warp screamed, not in sound, but in sorrow. The walls trembled, shadows writhed, faces flickered across the air. The brothers staggered, clutching their helms, their prayers breaking upon their lips. Elric felt it press upon him, heavier than ever before, and he knew the abyss itself bore witness to their fracture. When the tremor passed, the hall lay in ruin. Brothers lay upon the floor, some dead, some weeping, some staring at their blades in horror. Valdor knelt, his sword fallen, his voice broken. "What are we, if not silence?" Elric lowered his halberd, his voice heavy with grief. "We were guardians. Now we are fragments, and fragments cannot endure." Cailan came to his side, blood staining his armor, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Then what now? Aelric looked toward the void beyond the walls, where the warp wept unseen. His voice came low, like a vow spoken not to men, but to eternity. Now we endure as fragments, until silence itself breaks. The hall fell into stillness. No one spoke. The warp's weeping filled the silence where their oaths had once been. The warp calmed around them, but it was not peace. It was the eye of something vast and unseen, the breath held before a final exhale. Within the Oathbearer, the aftermath of the Brotherhood's collapse settled like dust in a crypt. The great hall had been scrubbed of blood, but the stain of what had transpired remained. Knights who once stood shoulder to shoulder now moved past one another with downcast eyes, their armor echoing with guilt instead of pride. No prayers were spoken aloud. No orders were barked with clarity. The ship floated, and so too did its people, adrift in both space and purpose. Aelric had not slept. In truth, he did not know if sleep was possible anymore. He sat in the sanctuary chamber with his helm before him, staring into the hollow eye lenses as if waiting for them to blink. His hands were bare, calloused, and scarred, resting upon the steel altar as though in silent penance. The weeping of the warp had not left him. If anything, it was closer now, not a voice from without, but a pressure from within. He could feel it pulsing behind his ribs, breathing with him, grieving with him. The sorrow of it no longer frightened him. It was the only thing left that felt real. Cailan entered the chamber without ceremony. He no longer asked permission to be near Elric, just as Elric no longer needed to speak for Cailan to understand him. Their bond had passed beyond orders and into something quieter. Shared burden, shared damnation. Cailan moved slowly, still recovering from wounds, both seen and unseen. He set a data slate beside the helm. Intercepted transmission, he said. Severin. He reached Titan. Elric didn't look up. His voice was barely audible. What did he say? Cailan's jaw worked, as if the words themselves were poison. He told them we've fallen, claimed the Oathbearer has been consumed by warp-born corruption. He said you commune with demons, that I killed brothers in your name, that the ship itself is cursed. Elric nodded slowly, as if the words were only confirmation of something he had always known would come. And they believed him. They believed him, Cailan echoed. They've declared you apostate. A death warrant has been issued. Any loyal forces that find us are ordered to cleanse the vessel, recover the relics, and execute every soul aboard. Silence followed. Not the silence of hesitation, but of inevitability. The kind of silence that arrives when all other sounds have been exhausted. Elric picked up his helm, turned it in his hands. The metal was cool, smooth, impersonal. So it is done. The last stone placed, the last lie sealed. Cailan stepped closer, his voice quieter now. What do we do? Elric stood slowly, his form seeming to carry the weight of entire star systems. He placed the helm upon his head, sealing it with a hiss of air. His voice came filtered, distant, yet unmistakably resolute. We do not return. We do not seek absolution. We move forward. Cailan blinked. To where? Elric turned toward the viewport, where the warp pulsed beyond the glass like the surface of a dreaming sea. To the edge, where even silence cannot follow. By the end of the day, he had gathered the remaining knights, those who had not turned their blades against him, those who had stood down when the warp had screamed, those who remained not out of loyalty, but because there was nowhere else left to go. They stood before him in the lower hangar, where once boarding torpedoes had launched to righteous war. Now the walls were cracked with disrepair, and the air stank of fuel and old prayers. Elric's voice echoed through the hall, every word deliberate, every pause a weight. You are not my brothers anymore. Not by vow, not by purity, not by faith. What we were died the moment we let silence drown our souls. You stand here not because of unity, but because you chose not to kill me. That is enough. It is more than most would give. Some shifted uneasily. Others lowered their heads, but no one turned away. We cannot go back, he continued. Even if we wished to, even if we begged, Titan will never welcome us again. We are already ash in their records, and yet we live. That must mean something. It must become something. One of the younger knights, his voice trembling through his helm, asked the question that hung in the air like incense. What are we now, if not grey knights? Elric stepped down from the dais, his armor whispering with each movement. We are what they fear most, knights with memory, warriors who saw the truth and did not close their eyes. We are what the warp cannot silence, and what the Imperium cannot cleanse. Cailan raised his head then, his voice firmer than before. We are not pure, but we are not broken. Elric nodded. No longer pure, no longer silent, but still whole in the way that truth can make something whole. Ragged, fractured, but real. They stood there for a long time after, not speaking, letting the silence settle as something new. Not command, not guilt, but understanding. A different kind of silence. That night, Aelric stood alone in the chapel, staring up at the weathered icon of the Emperor. The paint had flaked, the gold leaf dulled by age and neglect. He wondered how many others had prayed here before him, how many knights had whispered their doubts into the wood and stone, only to smother them in silence. He did not pray. He only looked. The warp was calmer now, its weeping quieter, almost gentle. It pressed against him not as a threat, but as a mirror. He saw his reflection in it, not as a grand master, not as a traitor, but as a man burdened by the weight of knowing. He whispered one word, not a prayer, but a promise. Endure. Outside the chapel, the oath-bearer began to shift course. No longer fleeing, no longer hiding, it moved toward the edge of mapped space, toward the dark between the stars where forgotten things drifted, and silence had not yet claimed dominion. And in the heart of that ship, surrounded by fragments of a broken brotherhood, Elric stood unbowed, not pure, not forgiven, but still standing. The stars thinned. Beyond the reach of imperial cartography, the void grew, strange. The light bent differently, as though remembering a time before galaxies had been born. Here, in the silence between forgotten systems, the oath-bearer carved a path through the dark, its hull scarred, its crew quieter than ever before. There were no transmissions, no orders, no names spoken above a whisper. Just breath, just duty, just motion. Elric sat alone in the librarium's sanctum, its walls filled with tomes and data cores rendered unreadable by the warp static that had bled into the ship. The silence here was not of reverence, but of ruin. Every book held knowledge, catalogues of demon forms, rites of protection, histories of sacrifice, but none of them could tell him how to carry the truth. None of them had words for what happened when purity became execution, when obedience hollowed a soul. He stared at a ruined text, its pages warped. The ink melted into veins of black across gold parchment. Its title had been erased by flame. He felt it echoed in him. Cailan entered quietly. His presence no longer startled. It comforted, even when his steps bore tension. He carried two things, an auspex and a sealed box. Elric turned slowly to meet his gaze. Cailan said nothing for a moment, only set both items down upon the ruined lectern. His voice came low. "We found something." Elric's eyes fell to the auspex. Its surface flickered with readings that did not belong. The data shimmered, oscillating patterns in colors that did not exist, energy signatures folded inwards on themselves. "Warp resonance," Elric said. "But not chaos, not a demonic." Kalen nodded, his fingers tightening. "The void ahead is wrong. There is something in it. Not alive, not dead. We thought it a derelict, an old Mechanicus outpost perhaps. But it's older. I can feel it. The ship can feel it. Even the silence feels different here." Elric reached for the sealed box. He opened it slowly. Inside was a relic, or something close to one. A shard of crystalline alloy, inscribed with geometries too precise for human hands. It pulsed softly, not with light, but with absence. He didn't recognize the script, but the feeling it gave him was clear. It was a wound, something that had seen truth too vast to hold. Kalen's voice dropped. "Some say we're being drawn here, that the warp guides us, or that we're already lost, and this is just the dream before death." Elric held the shard in his palm. It was cold, heavy. "We are already lost," he said, "but not to death, to meaning. This place may be madness, Kalen, but perhaps madness is the last thing left to us that silence cannot steal." Kalen hesitated. "Should we turn back?" Elric looked at him, not with command, but with exhaustion. Back to what? The Oathbearer shifted course. The anomaly grew in the viewing chambers, a structure adrift in the void, half buried in a field of dust and static. It resembled no architecture known to the Imperium. It was not ruin, but something else, something unfinished, or perhaps never meant to be seen. A monolith suspended in space, its angles cutting through reality like blades through cloth. The ship's sensors failed to define its scale. Some believed it small. Others said it spanned light years. There were no doors, no walls, just form and void and meaning etched into matter. They sent no boarding party. Elric walked into it alone. The shuttle passed through the boundary without resistance. There was no force field, no pressure change, only silence, absolute and perfect, as if the air itself had ceased to exist. The structure did not resist him. It accepted him. Inside, there was light, but no source. The halls were formed of mirrored metal, each surface reflecting not his body, but his memories. He walked through scenes of Vaedrus burning, of Titan's golden halls, of Kalen wounded and kneeling, of Severin's laughter echoing over ash. And always he saw himself, not as warrior, but as hollow man, a statue of duty cracked down the spine. The voices came then, not from the warp, but from the walls. They did not whisper. They did not scream. They simply spoke, softly, without language, into the marrow of him. They showed him a battlefield beyond flesh, where ideas clashed louder than blades. They showed him silence as a god, devouring thought, demanding worship in the form of erased names and cleansed truths. They showed him the Emperor, his face blurred, his body distant, and beneath him, a galaxy of dead brothers kneeling in perfect order, their tongues cut out in his name. Elric fell to his knees, not in worship, in understanding. He saw then that the silence had never been meant to protect mankind. It had been meant to protect the lie. And the warp wept not because they fought demons, but because they had become deaf to themselves. They had made truth a heresy, and purity a weapon. The shard he had carried pulsed in his hand. He pressed it into the mirrored floor, and the structure responded. A pulse rippled outward, and the reflections fractured, not into chaos, but into clarity. The scenes shifted. He saw not just what was, but what had been lost. The brothers who had doubted but said nothing. The innocents whose screams had been filed into silence. The oaths that had once meant protection, not eradication. When he rose, he was changed. Not in form, not corrupted, but awakened. He returned to the oath-bearer hours later, or perhaps days. Time had no hold in that place. The crew stared as he walked aboard, his armor darkened, his eyes strange. Kalen met him at the ramp, his voice hushed. "What did you see?" Elric looked past him, toward the stars that were no longer stars, toward the warp that was no longer enemy. "Everything," he said, "and nothing I can explain." He turned to his men. Not many remained. Fewer still stood without fear. "We leave this place," he said, "but we do not flee it. We carry it." Kalen frowned. "What does that mean?" Elric looked up at the void, the memory of the mirrored halls still etched behind his eyes. "It means we are no longer Grey Knights. We are not ghosts. We are not traitors. We are memory, and memory does not bow." And as the oath-bearer turned from the monolith and slid into the dark, a faint hum echoed through its halls, not from engines or vox, but from the relics of thought that could no longer be silenced. Something had awakened, and it moved with them now, quiet as grief. The oath-bearer drifted, slower now, as if hesitant to rejoin the currents of the known void. Its engines pulsed not with urgency, but with something like contemplation. The crew moved through the corridors like monks in a cloister, their footsteps careful, their voices soft, as though afraid to disturb whatever had awakened within their commander. The silence they once enforced now hovered differently, not as a law, not as a weapon, but as the after-sound of something immense, like the last note of a requiem still hanging in the air, long after the choir had gone. In his private sanctum, Aelric knelt beneath the fractured statue of Saint Icariel, the angel who had died speaking against the burning of the Hessian oracles. The face of the statue was gone, eroded long before the oath-bearer left Titan. Only the wings remained, broken, rusted, open. Elric did not pray. He listened. Kalen entered, slow, deliberate. He waited for acknowledgement, but Elric did not rise. The stillness was complete. Finally, Kalen spoke. "The astropaths intercepted a signal. It's not from the Imperium. It's not from chaos. It's..." He hesitated. "It's memory, encoded in light." Elric opened his eyes. "Show me." They walked in silence to the chamber where the signal had been isolated. The screen pulsed gently, not with words, but images, snapshots of a world no longer charted, blackened towers standing beneath a dead sun, oceans turned to mirror, voices speaking languages that had never been taught to men. Each frame lingered too long. The silence between them pressed against the skull. "Do you know it?" Kalen asked. Elric nodded. "It's where we were made, but not where we were born." Kalen's brow furrowed. "Explain." "There were chapters before ours," Elric said. "Not of space marines, but of thought. Experiments in silence. Psychic nulls bred not to fight demons, but to erase memory. Entire cities were tested. Their screams went unheard." Kalen looked again at the screen. "This isn't a distress call." "No," Elric said. "It's an invitation." Kalen's voice grew quiet. "To what?" Elric turned to him. His eyes held no fire now, only the still weight of knowledge that had shed all illusion. "To end the lie. Not with war, not with heresy. With remembrance." They convened in the strategium. Not all the crew were present. Many had retreated into the ship's cloisters, refusing food, speaking only in fragments. Some had begun to dream, of voices they had never heard. Others etched symbols into their armor that were neither sanctioned nor readable. The oath-bearer had become a vessel not just of silence, but of unraveling. Elric addressed those who remained. He did not raise his voice. We were taught that silence was sacred, that purity was deafness, that the Emperor required obedience, not understanding. But we have seen the echoes. We have heard what was not meant to be heard. He paused. No one interrupted. There is a place, a vault, older than any fortress, buried within a sunless system where the first experiments in psychic silence were tested, not on Xenos, not on heretics, on citizens, loyal, faithful, forgotten. The room remained still. Kalen spoke, his voice barely louder than breath. What will we find there? Elric looked at him. Proof, not of treason, but of cost, of what it takes to bury a truth so deep that not even the warp remembers. A murmur stirred in the chamber. Not dissent, not agreement, just the first tremor of motion after too long holding breath. They changed course. The system was not on any chart. It did not respond to augurs. But the shard Elric had taken from the monolith pulsed with each degree closer. It led them. It sang softly, in tones no vox could replicate. The journey was slow. Warp travel failed. They slipped through the black on ion engines alone. The stars bent differently here. As they approached the system, the crew began to change. Not violently, not visibly, but in the way they looked at each other. No one saluted. No one used rank. They walked together as if bound by something older than order. In the mess hall, a brother once named Hallex shared a story of his first kill. Not in pride, but in mourning. Another wept, not for guilt, for memory. Then the vault came into view. It was a construct of impossible scale, shaped like an open eye, drifting at the edge of a dying star. Its surface was etched with runes worn down by centuries of exposure, but not time. Time did not live here. Only the act of forgetting. They docked in silence. The entryway opened without signal. The corridor beyond pulsed with psychic residue, thick and warm, like blood made of memory. They walked slowly. Every step echoed not just in the air, but in the soul. Inside, there were no defenses, no machines, just chambers. Room after room, filled with crystalline pillars, each containing a single frozen moment. A woman kneeling beside a son whose voice had been stolen. A preacher whose words fell dead in his own ears. A child drawing spirals on a wall no longer present. These were the echoes of silence, not the absence of sound, but the murder of meaning. Elric moved among them like a mourner in a cemetery of ghosts. He did not weep. He listened. In the center of the vault was a dais. Upon it, a throne of rusted silver, and seated there, a figure draped in the sigils of the Ordo Redactum, an inquisitor whose name had been stripped from all records. Their skull rested against their chest, but their hand remained open, palm upward, cradling the final shard. Elric knelt. He took the shard, pressed it to the one he already carried. They joined, not with light, but with heat, and the vault responded. The memories stirred. The chambers lit one by one. The faces within began to breathe, not live, but remember. Kalen stepped beside Elric. His voice cracked. What do we do now? Elric closed his eyes. We become the sound that silence could not kill. Outside, the oath-bearer waited, its engines dormant, its crew hushed. But the stars, once distant, seemed to lean closer. For the first time, they did not fear the silence. They understood it, and they chose to speak.